up today, and there's so many of us. At any point, if you can't hear us, if you can just raise your hand so we know we need to speak up, we will be more than happy to do so. But as you can understand, with such a large crowd, if we can keep our side conversations to a minimum, that will be really helpful for the people around you, because we're just kind of in a loud place to hold a training session, so we apologize about that. Hopefully everybody had a chance to sign in already and grab a transition folder. If you haven't, please go ahead and excuse yourselves and grab one of those over at the seats. We have some additional things to pass out through our presentation today, so we'll make sure everybody leaves with the copies that they need. First, I want to say thank you for coming. I know it's a mandatory training, so some of you really didn't have a choice, but I do appreciate you taking the time to be here today so that we can spend a little bit more time talking specifically about transition services and writing well-developed transition planning pieces of our IEPs. For our students. We will try to take questions today as we move along. If we get to a very specific type of question that might not need addressed for the entire group, we might ask you to hold that question and we'll revisit it one-on-one with you towards the end. Our goal, obviously, is to get you out of here by 5 o'clock earlier, if at all possible, but most importantly, covering all the information that we plan to get through today, so you leave with some good resources in your hands for the remainder of the year. My name is Colleen Meadows, and I'm the Special Education Coordinator down at North Mac.
And I'm Gretchen Ryman, Special Ed Coordinator at New Berlin and Auburn. And so I will get started. This is our agenda. You probably all have a copy of this. We're going to talk about the transition assessments, Indicator 13. We're going to go over the folder with you. We're going to go to the SASED website to show you the resources that are available there. We're going to summarize the assessment results and how to put those into eStar. Then we're going to actually look at the TPG plan. We're going to provide you with a copy of a completed one. And then we're also going to go over the goals in the IEP, what they need to look like. And then lastly, what the summary performance needs to look like when it's completed correctly. All right? So the reason why we're doing this is that last year we had a transition planning committee, and after meeting several times, we realized that every year we have to fill out that Indicator 13. And that really kind of drives what we have to include in the transition plan. And as a team, we really felt that, like on number 3, where it says, was an age-appropriate assessment given prior to the IEP meeting that addressed employment, then the same question is asked regarding education or training, and then also independent living. And we really felt that we weren't doing that appropriately. And when we put the answer yes, we really felt that that wasn't truthful, and we were like, we don't really do that. And that's something that we really needed to address and make available to all of you so that when we do complete this Indicator 13, we can with confidence say, yes, we are in fact doing what the Indicator 13 requests. Indicator 13 is one of those indicators that is monitored by the state, and if we were ever be audited and they'd say, okay, you answered yes to these, let me see that student's file, do you have evidence that you did that? We would be like, well, we did this and we did this, and it might not meet their criteria. So we wanted to be sure that we were doing things appropriately to make sure that we would meet the requirements of this indicator. Okay? So in your folder, what we did as a team was we decided that we would come up with a sheet that has every assessment that you will share with that you will give to your student for each specific grade level. And in there, I showed you one that's completed, what it will look like. So, you know, it's very basic. You just put the name of the student, you put the date of birth. In 7th grade, it tells you what survey you're going to do. The first means first semester, connecting to your future second. You put the school year and the dates it was administered. So that's going to stay with that student. You're going to staple it into that TPG folder, and every year as a student advances to the grades, it's going to be moved on to the student's next case manager. But this will stay in the folder. When the student finally graduates or leaves school, you're going to make a copy of this, put it in the student's temporary record, there's their file, and then you're going to give that whole TPG folder to the student. So this is what it's going to look like. So then what we've done is, in our SASED website, you're just going to go here, you're going to go to, where am I going here?
I think go to
More. Resources, I'm sorry, you're going to go to Resources, and you're going to, click over here. Okay, sorry. Click Resources, and you're going to go to Transition. And there they all are. So for 7th grade, there are the 2 assessments that we're asking you to give the student. You just click on it and it'll show up. So it's really, we're trying to make it as user-friendly as we can. So I can get this to open up for you. And then you'll just print it out and give it to the student. So there's one for every single grade level. You will notice 11th grade, obviously that's when they're going to take the SAT or the Illinois Alternate Assessment. And then also in 12th grade, there is not a specific sheet that you're going to copy. You're going to do a mock interview or a presentation on a career, your choice. Also, you'll see the COPS right here. We are purchasing the COPS and you will have access to that. We won't download it on here, but it'll be a hard copy that you'll receive from your administrator to administer to students, but that will be one of the assessments that we're using. You have to do what we have on here. If you want to do others and add it to the folder, you can certainly do that, but you have to do those that we've listed here. Okay, are there any questions over this part? Go ahead.
The things that we're going to print out to do the surveys, do we then leave the surveys in here, or we just have to say that we administered them? It's like career cruising, is there something specific we need to print out that shows that we did that?
You can print out the career cruising and put it in the folder.
Just put it in there?
Yes,
Okay.
and all of these will go in the student's folder.
'Cause
So
the
it'll
ones
get
that
bigger and bigger each year, but
Okay.
yes, that's a good question. So any other questions on that? So this sheet, we gave you a blank one. So you're going to need to make one for every student that's 14 or older on your caseload. And you're going to put it in their transition folder, staple it in the folder, and start doing it this year. Okay, this is the expectation of all of you to continue to do this. Any questions over that? We also brought a lot of folders. I know some of you asked, can we have transition folders? We have a lot of extras here, so if you need some, like some of your students do not have them, please feel free to pick up some to take to your students. All right? So now Colleen is going to talk about the...
So I'm just going to talk about, in theory, it's nice that we give you this plan. We say, you're going to go forth, you're going to administer these surveys or questionnaires or these assessments at these particular times. But it doesn't really help us unless we talk to you more specifically about how to take the information that you're collecting and put it into action when you're developing an IEP or writing the secondary transition pages or filling out the SOP, those things. So that's where I want to spend like the bulk of our training on today is, so now what? We've done the assessment, how do I move forward? How do I use that information to write a good plan for the student? So that's kind of what I'm going to focus my portion on. If you have specific questions, I'd be happy to address those too. But for example, I pulled up the Career Cluster Interest Inventory. This is something, according to your list, I can't remember what grade level this is done. I think it is grade 10th grade. You'll see that that is the assessment that's given second semester. When our committee was together looking at these and trying to select things for you guys, we tried to keep them thorough yet brief. So brief in administration, but thorough in information that it could give us as far as feedback for the students to utilize. We realized that we're kind of trying to create a one shoe or one size fits all type of scenario, and not all of our students are like that. And so it may be, and that's why Gretchen said, that you need to branch out and maybe do something supplemental that we're not requiring specific because that student is maybe either lower functioning or has different needs than maybe our typical, mainstream type student has. So I will say that when looking at this, I wanted to call attention to this thing down here. This is the CBE Life Skills Inventory. That can be used at any grade level. So if you're working with students that are lower functioning, I would highly recommend the Life Skills Inventory. That can be administered more than once. So it's not a once and done. If you want to do it annually to see if the student's interests, strengths, preferences are changing over time, that can certainly be something that is done because it's going to look at what particular skills is the student presenting with at that time, and we hope that we can see a progression throughout high school years. So that's fine if you want to re-administer that more than once, especially if that's the population that you're most commonly working with. So just keep in mind, just because we have these typical ones, there are additional things, and if in doubt you feel like you need supplemental and you don't know where to look, I would encourage you to talk to your coordinator about, what other assessments might I give. I make available to this particular student so I have more usable information when writing that TPG. So I just kind of pulled up one in particular. This one's called the Career Cluster Inventory, and the way that this one is administered, it has very simple directions at the beginning, but just to give you an idea, basically the student is looking at number 1, there's 2 options, operating a printing press or studying the causes of earthquakes. And they're just selecting which one is a greater preference for them. Now I understand, neither of those might not be a preference for them long-term for employment. But the idea is through their selection of answers, it's gonna zone in on a particular cluster or multiple clusters that may be of interest to them. And by clusters, we're talking like health services, animals, they're very broad. So this helps us narrow the scope. And basically they're going through this. Now, I might have to read this to a student, and I might be able to hand it to a student and say, go through and circle one answer for each. So depending on your population, you can decide how that might most effectively be administered. Then when you're done, you basically, the 3rd page of this, and I can show you on the screen, the 3rd page just asks you to summarize the results. So every time the student answered A, you put a tally mark. Every time they answered B, stick a tally mark. And what you're going to do by the end is identify what clusters were most commonly identified as areas of interest. So I did one with my daughter, just so I would have some real feedback. And her 3 areas were law and safety, healthcare, and animals. And so it gives me an idea of where they might want to start focusing their interest for employment. Now, obviously, those are really big areas. So now I might suggest, okay, let's go back to career cruising and let's look at what they have in the area of healthcare, or let's go back and look what they have in the area of law and safety and see if we can investigate that a little bit more. So this should hopefully give you some information about how to continue to shape or narrow the scope of what the student is focused on and interested in. It might be that when you get to the IEP that you're summarizing this assessment under their present levels. So they took this vocational assessment. We found that their top 3 career clusters of interest are the following. And on the last page of the assessment, it tells you kind of what is included in each of those. So for example, if they picked Q, animals, that has to do with the training, raising, feeding, and caring of animals. Likewise, if they picked information technology, it gives you a description of that. So those would be good things to include in your present levels so that you're describing how the child has continued to narrow their interest level, their interest in regards to employment. So there's lots of these in here. This one really focuses on employment, but others focus on independent living or education or all 3 areas in one assessment. So our hope is that by the time they move through the different grade levels, that we have hit all of those areas multiple times with different assessments. Does that make sense? Okay. So that's one thing that I wanted to show you. Let's spend a little bit more time going into the actual eStar program. And for this, I went in and created a lot of documents under Sally's sample. And so that you guys could kind of reference that today as far as what would that look like in an actual secondary transition page. So I'm actually going to start with this, which is just when you open up the student's IEP, of course, as you know, the 3rd tab talks about secondary transition, and this is where we're filling out what their goals are after high school, what their course of study plans are, what their transition services are, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm going to pass this out so that you guys can take a look at it. I'll give you guys a few minutes to get those passed down the table.
If you have extras, just move them on. If we need to make more, we will.
Did everybody get one? How many? Do we have any extras anywhere? No, we might make. Can I see a show of hands how many more I need? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, Carolyn's going to make us a couple extra copies. For those of you at the end, if somebody will share with them where we can kind of just partner share until we get those copies in, that would be awesome. Okay, so at the very top of the secondary transition page, remember you're completing these pages if the student that you're serving will turn 14 and a half during the IEP year. So they might not be 14 and a half when you're writing the IEP, but 3 months from now they'll be 14 and a half. Those secondary transition pages need to be completed. Okay? So in here, what information can we list? Well, now that we have a plan for how we will be assessing at every grade level, it makes filling in these boxes a whole lot simpler. Because you're going to go to that plan that says in 7th grade I administer this, in 8th grade I administer this, in 9th grade I administer this. And if the form is traveling with your student in that vocational folder, you can see exactly when those assessments have been administered because the date should be entered on the form. You're going to go ahead and include them under the appropriate categories. So for example, you'll notice the 7th grade survey covers employment, education, and independent living. So I can list that as an assessment that was given in all 3 categories. Now the student, Sally Sample, I'm pretending like she's a 12th grader. So that's why there's so many things listed here, because she's been receiving transition assessments in 7th or 8th grade, depending on when she turned 14 and a half. Okay? So you'll see in the far right column, I've included what year that was conducted. Now ideally, in our things, we actually have a date. You know, it was actually administered on such and such date. If you have that specific information, feel free to add that. But I'm okay if it says a year.
So once they're entered, they stay there permanently?
What stays there permanently? This information?
Yeah.
It depends.
Every year when I write transition plan,
Maybe you should be able to see what somebody else put in the previous year. Is that what you're suggesting?
yeah.
Yes. If that's how the draft IEP is created, yes, it would carry over.
Because I personally am they're blind, and I feel out what's going to happen this year. Is that which way's right?
If the assessment has already been given, we want to list it. We want to give ourselves credit where credit is due. So if we've already done these things, let's get it in their plan as evidence that they've already been administered. Now I understand, let's say it's August and we're meeting on Sally and there are things that I'm going to administer this school year that haven't been administered yet, then obviously I could still list those and the date conducted might be 17, 18. Does that make sense? What I don't think we should do is do like 3 years from now she'll get this assessment. I would say, these are the assessments she's gotten so far, these are the assessments I will be giving this year. And then each year we should be able to add a line to that. Last year she got those, and this year I'm giving X. Does that make sense? So that should help you fill out this top section a lot easier because now we have specific assessments that can be listed for each of those areas. The second section has to do with what would Sally like to do after high school. So this is different than the goals that you enter on the goal pages. Because the goals we enter on the goal pages are things we're working on right now. These goals are where would Sally like to be down the road after high school in the areas of education, employment, and independent living, or training, depending on their function level.
What are we supposed to put in training?
Okay, so in training, I would consider if that is a kiddo that is not going to a community college, four-year university, or tech or trade school, then they're going to be getting like on-the-job training through like a STEP coach or DHS. They might be working in a sheltered workshop, something like that.
Okay, so anything that's on the job, that's but
Yes.
training, like, training to me is vocational, so I've always been.
Yes, so it gives you some examples. If you look here in this statement under training, this would be like a vocational training program. So I'm thinking this is more our lower functioning kids that might be doing something with a linked program post high school.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
Yeah.
What if they're in STEP? Put that in.
Okay, if they're in STEP, remember, these goals are for what they'd like to do after high school. So my guess would be that they're not participating in STEP after high school. They're probably participating in DHS and in that. So if they're getting on-the-job training through DHS post-high school or something like that, or like, for example, in Macoupin County, we have job coaches that will still assist for our kids after the age of 22, then I would include that information there. But again, this is after high school. So for example, on Sally Sample, I just said after high school graduation and earning a bachelor degree of science, she will be employed as a registered nurse. These have to be written as observable and measurable. Now, reporting progress report information on these. You're not including this information in your annual review timelines. It's just what would she like to do, and you don't want to say that she would like to do. You would say she will do. It's written in the active voice. The second one has to do with education. Well, Sally would like to attend Lincoln Land Community College. So I wrote, following high school graduation, Sally will enroll at Lincoln Land Community College to work towards a 2-year degree in nursing. That's just an example. It might be that following high school graduation, Sally will obtain a part-time competitive job at Subway. Whatever that particular person is looking to do. Independent living. I know in my district, it's just speaking from experience, a lot of time we think about where is the kid gonna reside? And that's how that goal is written. And that's fine, because part of the independent living outcome goal is where will they reside or how will they live. But it also includes all these other areas like health and safety, self-advocacy, transportation, social relationships, rec and leisure, and financial. So it doesn't just have to be written about where they're gonna reside. Think about that in other terms. If their goal is that they will learn, that they will use public transportation to access on-the-job training, then that can be their goal under independent living, because that's still appropriate for them. So it doesn't just have to be about where they're gonna reside. And I don't know that we always think about this last goal area other than where will they reside. They'll reside with parents, they'll live in a dorm, they'll live in an apartment with friends, but we never really talk about some of these other areas, and it's okay to write the goal to address one of those different areas. Again, these are all things that they want to do after high school. Questions on that section? How would I know what Sally wants to do? Go ahead.
Go ahead and ask them.
Yeah, you start by asking them, right? It's obvious. We can ask them. We can count that as a student interview, and if we do a student interview, we can include it as an assessment up here. It's that simple. We also have a lot of feedback from our assessments that say what their interests are. So we can start narrowing these things, you know, that she will obtain a job in the area of health services. And then maybe the following year, it's a little bit more specific and a little bit more specific until now she's gonna work towards a 2-year LPN degree. You see what I'm saying? So think about, you know, how we're gonna continue to narrow that scope over time. Yes?
You know, we have the kids who insist they're going to be the professional athlete. And that's all
It's
they
amazing
tell
the
us.
number of professional athletes that we
Yeah.
have as students, right?
Now, what happens if that's still, up until there's, you know, we're doing the IEP before their senior year of high school.
I'm
or
so
they're
glad
gonna
you
say,
asked that question, because we get that all the time. You know, I'm going to be a professional football player, but I've never played JFL, and I don't play on the high school team, but watch me. You know, we don't want to kill a dream. So I always say, awesome, I hope you do. I hope I'm watching Sunday football one day and you're on TV. But if that doesn't work out, you need to identify a second choice for me.
Okay.
And so that's what I have always maintained, is that you can say that your first hope is to become a professional football player, and I will write it in there. After high school graduation, so-and-so will be drafted by the NFL. Or will,
Okay.
and blah, 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 blah,
So
okay?
just put it as an or, okay.
I would do that, because then we're still being respectful of their preference and their interest. We're also giving a signal to the next year's case manager that we probably need to work on what is realistic and how well prepared is the student for the NFL. But we're also saying, that's fine, I'll recognize that, but I need a plan B. If
Okay.
that wouldn't work out, even professionals in the NFL have to have a plan B someday if they don't get drafted.
Well, what happens when you tear a rotator or saphenate your ACL? They're like,
Right.
oh yeah, that's a good point.
Right, so I would address it that way, and I would be adamant that there has to be a second option.
Okay.
Questions about that? The next part is pretty simple, and basically you're putting in their course of study. So you're talking about what courses are they taking towards graduation, most likely in our case. You know, what classes are they enrolled in? And that is done as a 4-year projection. That's pretty self-explanatory unless anybody wants me to spend more time on that. Okay, the last section has to do with transition services. For me, personally, this is the hardest section. I don't know about you guys, but I find this very difficult. So I did a lot of research to kind of come up with, well, what are other cooperatives and special education teachers, how are they completing this? What are some other options for us? So first I want to be clear about what this section is actually targeting. So this section is talking about like this coordinated list of activities. So I have this kid, I have Sally Sample. I know she wants to be a nurse someday. Sally Sample is currently maybe a junior sitting in the high school, and she's not equipped to be a nurse right now. In fact, if I look at her skill set and what skill set a nurse has to have, I'm sure there are some gaps between where she is at and where she would need to be in order to be a successful nurse, right? So this section starts getting us to hone in on what are some of those skills that she still needs in each of these core 6 areas to make her better prepared to become a nurse or a librarian or a professional football player or whatever their goal may be. So this is a coordinated set of activities that are hopefully moving the child from where they currently are one step closer to where they would like to be. Okay? Now, over the course of several years in an, IEP after IEP, our goal is that there should be enough activities in skill development that they are getting closer to actually making that a possibility. So when you think about this, you kind of want to look at what set of activities that are based on their needs, their current deficits, their preferences and interests post-high school, and where identify those gaps. What's lacking right now? What would they still need in each of these areas in order to have a better chance of doing that? So it's hard. It's hard to just think of those things on your own. So I found a pretty good reference through the Indiana Secondary Transition Resource Center. And it outlines each of, 5 of these 6 areas and gives you a lot of ideas of what types of things we might type in there. Now, this doesn't mean these are the only ones you can use, but these are a good place for you to start thinking.
Fresh breath, she wanted to make more.
Okay, yeah, we might be 5 short or so. Okay. Okay, this particular document is not on SASOD's website. That's the extra thing you get for coming today. But I think it's a really nice resource. So as you start to flip through it, you'll see the first page talks about instruction, and it lists a variety of skills or activities, things that the student may still need. I put a few examples in Sally's. So if you take a look up here, under instruction, taking classes to meet her high school diploma requirements, those are still skills and information that she's going to have to gain. Learn and demonstrate time management skills. What I didn't tell you is Sally Sample has ADHD and is eligible under OHI. The next one, participate in driver's education training. And then in her particular case, research Lincoln Land Community College admission requirements, because that's what she's identified an interest in. So it gives you an idea of these are some activities that we would need to coordinate in the area of instruction, and we want to tie these to her goals and objectives eventually. Okay? Related services. Now, under related services, it gives you a lot of ideas about related services. It could be in terms of assistive technology. Could be with counseling. Could be about drug and alcohol abuse. There could be a lot of different related services: speech, OT, PT, etc. In this particular case, none of those pertained to Sally, so it's okay to write NA. But what you shouldn't be doing is writing NA for all 6 categories. Why? What does that suggest? If you put NA, they need no additional skills or activities in any area. Yeah, they're perfect. They could be a nurse tomorrow. Okay, we know that's not true. They need those things. So that would be a red flag to me as a coordinator if I sat down and there's NA in all 6 categories, because that tells me that they don't need any activities, they don't need any additional instruction. They could go do their post-secondary goals now without facilitating any additional learning. So this isn't an end-all be-all list. You can go above and beyond this list, but I'm hoping that it starts spurring some ideas with you about what types of things you might be entering in this section. As we continue down, community experiences, I want her to participate in a tour of Lincoln Land.
Now, if you put it in there, do we have to provide it?
So it's an activity then that you feel is necessary. So somebody on her IEP team should be providing that. Whether that's a coordination of efforts, for example, maybe at North Mac, this would be my guidance counselor is working with parents to get permission slips so they can take one trip up and do a tour of Lincoln Land, something like that. So it doesn't have to be an individualized activity, but it should be an activity that you're going to facilitate. Because again, these are activities or skills that they need to help bridge between where they are right now and where they would like to be after high school. And for them, if community college or Midwest Technical Institute or a four-year university is something they're looking at, then we should be talking about, well, what skills are you going to need in order to accomplish that?
But if I'm just writing this transition plan for an eighth grader, I wouldn't necessarily write that because I'm not going to be doing that at the eighth grade level.
Absolutely.
So I just,
Correct. So it's like, let's think about that. As an eighth grader, what types of skills do they currently need? You know, what types of things, what types of activities do they currently need to complete in order to start moving them towards that? What we don't want to do is postpone, and then junior and senior year, it's like, well, nothing's been done because we were too generic along the way. So then I've included a couple additional things here. You'll see that in this particular case, either the case manager, the school nurse, the guidance counselor, other people on my IEP team are being identified as assisting with doing this. And sometimes it might be as broad as the staff. Because when we're talking about instruction towards a diploma, that involves a lot of people. So you're going to include like who's going to help facilitate that activity or that skill. And then the next column has to do with what goal numbers correlate with that. Well, this is where you start to make a connection between the secondary transition pages and then those transition goals you actually have to write and put in the goal pages of the IEP. To me, this makes that process very simple. Because now I've identified, well, this is where she's at. This is how I'd like to move her towards those goals. These are the activities or things that we need to be working on. So now this is the basis of my goal writing when I go to write an education goal, or I go to write an employment goal, or I go to write an independent living goal. Does that make sense? So I'm looking at these activities that I came up with in column 3, and I'm thinking, is that employment? Is that education? Is that independent living? And then I'm saying, in my case, you know, maybe employment was goal 1, education was goal 2, and independent living was goal 3, and I'm just identifying which ones they relate to. When I go to write my goals, then you'll see, and I'll take you there next, how that transitions into that goal writing. Go ahead.
Are these things we're supposed to do within the next year?
Those are things that I would say that me as a case manager or the school nurse or the staff or the guidance counselor is going to complete with Sally over the next year.
Over the next year? Because I proposed that like some things that
If-
were going to happen in high school, so I should.
Okay, if it's going to be in high school, then just be careful to make sure the date to be addressed and the date completed reflects that time range then.
Okay. So
Okay.
it's okay to do it, just make sure.
It's okay to do it as long as those dates reflect that.
Colleen, I want to just say something about
Yeah.
this. So in our IEP program, you know, you have to add each one of these, right? And so I'm going to tell you, as a special ed administrator sitting behind that laptop, when I open that up and none of those have been started, even if it's an NA, you need to start it and you need to say not applicable. Okay? So when you look at this, it's just one little skinny blip in the program. So you have to add each section, and you should add 6 sections. All of these should be addressed. And I think that if you leave with anything today, it's your
So here they are.
responsibilities is to make sure you add each of these sections. Because if you're not, then you're not addressing every component of the transition plan.
And that's not really something